All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got a great guest for you guys today. He's running for office, for statewide office in Arkansas. But before we get into all of that, I just want to remind you to like this, share this, and you got to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview or episode. Also, check out my Substack, Chasing Liberty. You can get that at libertychasers.com. Become a paid subscriber and support my work. I highly appreciate it. I'm putting all kinds of liberty-related content up there and even content about other cool stuff. So hit that up at libertychasers.com. So without further ado, I want to bring on my guest, Mr. Michael White, who is running for State House in Arkansas as a Libertarian. So we're going to get into his campaign. We're going to talk about, your stances and all that great stuff. But welcome to the program, brother.
Man, Jeff, thanks for having me. I mean, again, as a person of whiteness, as a member of the whiteness delegation, it is great to be here with you.
Yeah, maybe we can
Dude, we
talk
have
about some
a
policies intended to save people of whiteness from, dying because
yeah.
they play with wild bears and stuff like that. That's a key component of my platform. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
We had a bear was spotted in Little Rock like 2 weeks ago. That was moving through. It's like a yearling bear that was pushed out by the mean older bears, and it was spotted in Little Rock. And it was amazing to see the comments. And I was reading them, knowing my friend Jeff Charles's stance on this, right? And there are like, women who are like, "Oh, he's so cute." I was like,
That's
"He
how
would
they get
probably
you.
eat you, lady. Leave him alone." And someone said, "If he's not a friend, why is he friend shaped?"
Oh, I get that all the time. It's like the mantra. Why would he be friend? He's not friend shaped. Have you seen those claws? Have you seen those teeth? Those things
Yeah.
are like 80 feet tall. That is not friend shaped, people of whiteness. Goodness.
Anyway, it was just very funny to finally, I was experiencing the moment in real time, the people of whiteness moment in real time, in 3D, so to speak. So,
Yeah. So here's my question. What
sure.
what motivated you to run for a state house? I mean, I know your race is a little unique, so you can talk a little bit about that. But what pushed you to do this in the first place?
So, a little backstory in 2022, but some people watching this might not know, I ran for U.S. Congress against the sitting incumbent Republican. And I really did that as a messaging campaign. I felt that liberty was on its deathbed, essentially after COVID. Like many people, I was disenfranchised with the fact that individuals who claim to stand for my rights and your rights were not doing so. And so I ran for office to try to just let people know, hey, liberty is still out there. You have to grab hold of it. It requires your participation and your active engagement to keep and save and preserve. And so I did that in 2022 and with the unique opportunity to be on a statewide televised debate, which was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. One of the most nerve-wracking days of my life, but also apparently I did pretty good, and people thought I did pretty good. And I was kind of content to do that again in 2024. In fact, I planned on that was kind of what I was going to do was just do another federal office that was quote unquote unwinnable. And just continue the messaging of the beauty, the gospel, the good news of liberty, so to speak. And a unique way that the ballot access laws worked out for us in this cycle is we had sort of, I guess, we would know who was running unopposed after their deadlines had passed, the Democrats and Republicans. And there's like a handful of districts in this state where they're competitive, where, one person actually can unseat the other person, where they're not so gerrymandered that they're 80%, Republican or 80% Democrat. And one of those happened to be my districts, and that district happened to be unopposed. And so it was a combination of factors. One was this is an ability now to actually not just occupy hearts and minds, but occupy an office and really show the practicality of what liberty means in practice in a legislative discussion. It's also, hey, people deserve a choice. That was kind of a little bit sprinkled in there. Like, there's no one should just walk into office unopposed. And of course, the messaging continuing and maybe be a little more specific to a local level. But also, I've had this belief for a long time that the federal government really is on its deathbed. I don't think that it's a matter of if we have some sort of systemic failure from a financial standpoint at a federal level, but a matter of when. And I've seen things die systemically before, and typically in their last days, they become incredibly desperate.
Mhm.
And in doing so, they make massive overreaches. And after seeing what happened in the COVID regime, I can only imagine what the overreaches might look like in a dollar collapse regime. And so I believe, as a minarchist personally, that government's role is to protect the rights we're born with. And so I think that ultimately that will come down to the states and the state legislatures at that moment. And so, yeah, I feel compelled to run for office. I know that's a wordy explanation, but that's really kind of all that went into it.
Well, I mean, and I love to see it because I mean, I've been saying this for years. The federal government is pretty much gone at this point. It's so mired in corruption and in overreach, and the elites have a chokehold on it, so that even if you do get somebody who is decent and liberty loving in, they're not going to be able to do much because of that machine. But when you're looking at the
Right.
state level, and the local level, there you can really actually make more of a difference. So when I see people running for federal office, I'm like, why? I mean, I don't knock them for it. I mean, run for what you want to run for. Do
Sure.
what you got to do.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, people have to see that it's your state governments and even more so your local governments that you really need to be paying attention to. So I'm glad to see that you're doing this. Is your opponent a Democrat or a Republican?
She is a Democrat. Yeah, she's the incumbent Democrat. And this is a literally a 50-50 district.
Mhm.
It continually polls within the margin of error between Democrats and Republicans. So it is a winnable election. There's no Republican candidate. So this is very winnable. We can win this race. And we are aiming to win this race. And according to some people, we're the favorite to win. It just depends on who you ask, really.
So why didn't the Republicans run a candidate? I mean, not that I'm complaining, but why didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked that question a number of times. As I've sort of learned more of the inside stance of the Republican Party of Arkansas, apparently it just came down to really where they wanted resources to be pushed. It was a presidential election year. They have a lot going on with that. Obviously, that becomes a top priority from an RNC standpoint.
Mhm.
And then I think by the time it kind of got down to this level, it was just, hey, candidate recruiting isn't a high thing on our list for District 75. And so I kind of consider that divine providence, right? Like now we have a chance to really run in a winnable race as a two-way race as a big L libertarian. And, typically speaking, there's a lot of two-way libertarian races where libertarians running against a Republican or a Democrat out there on a state or local level. But Jeff, the reason we're in those races as two-way races 99% of the time is because they're so one-sided in the electorate. They're 90-10 districts where, again, the Democrat leads by, 80 points. And so the Republicans don't just run anybody at all. And we go, hey, we're running. This is really one where we sort of, I think, have replaced the Republican candidate in some ways as far as legitimacy and sort of voter share walking into it. And then I think we have a unique position to sway those independent voters and even some Democrat voters to make a leap from their party allegiance or their non-allegiances and join us over here in the pool of liberty.
So let me ask you this, because this is a unique opportunity in your district specifically. How do you plan to appeal to voters who might be hesitant to support a libertarian candidate? I mean, you already have a leg up because there's no Republican running, so it's you and the
Sure.
Democrat. But even so, there's still that fear because people, one, don't really understand what a libertarian is, and two, they're always told that, oh, you're
Right.
gonna throw your vote away, yada yada. Although that's again not the case in this situation because there's no Republican running. So how do you plan to
Right.
capitalize on that and appeal to voters who might be a little hesitant or unknowledgeable about what libertarianism is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And it doesn't just really apply to this race. I think that question can apply to any time
Mhm.
that a libertarian is running for anything. I feel that libertarians, from just a 30,000-foot measure of what happens, I think, in the last few election cycles that I've witnessed, is a lot of candidates lead with libertarianism. Like that's like their selling point is I'm a libertarian and this is why I'm better than yada, 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 yada. Um, that's not how you win hearts and minds, right? You win hearts and minds in the political process by showing practicality, compassion, the ability to understand, listen, and gain someone's trust that you can adequately represent them in their best interest in some sort of fiduciary manner, right? And so I don't lead with I'm a libertarian. I lead with what the practicality of liberty is. Very basic things we all can agree on, which is, hey, you should be able to own your own labor. You should be able to own your property, right? You are not government property. It sure feels like the government thinks you're their property, doesn't it? Do you feel represented or do you not feel represented? Why do you think that is? What is it about the two-party system that you've been disenfranchised with, whether it's on Republicans or Democrats or both? Um, and when you meet voters at their door, which I do a lot of, I do a lot of door knocking and a lot of talking to voters. Um, they don't really care about a party allegiance. They care
Mm.
about, again, if you're the person that can listen to them, understand them, and can represent them in a manner where they feel like, hey, this guy really gets me. He really understands the things that I'm going through. I've had one, I knocked on a lady's door who was a Democrat voter. And on my door hanger at the very top, it says endorsed by gun owners of Arkansas, because obviously I'm a very strong 2A candidate. And she goes, oh, no, 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 I can't vote for you. And I said, well, ma'am, can I ask you why? And she goes, oh, you don't have enough time. And I said, ma'am, I got nothing but time. And I was like, even if I can't earn your vote, I said, I can definitely learn from you about what it would be, why you wouldn't vote for me. And that can make me a better representative for when I win this office. And she kind of looked at me a little perplexed. And we had about a 20-minute long conversation of where she had arrived at these conclusions regarding guns and, the 2A and statistics and her view of the criminal justice system. And we had this back and forth, and she kind of starts to realize, she was like, wait, so you're not going to like really force anything on me? And I said, no. I said, that's the beautiful thing about it is you and I might differ wildly politically, but I don't want to force anything upon you. In fact, I want to make sure that you're not forced to do things. And she looked at me and she goes, you know what? You're the only candidate in an election that I can remember who has stayed this long at my door, knocked on my door nonetheless, stayed here, talked to me, listened to me, didn't just, disregard me. I am voting for you. And that's how you win
Wow.
hearts and minds. You know, if we're just trying to capture minds that are already made up, we're playing the wrong game, right? We have to change people's minds and we have to show that, liberty is the class act. And that's what I'm trying to do out here.
Yeah, you know what? When you were talking, it reminded me of a candidate that I had interviewed a few years ago. I can't remember which one. Maybe it was 2022. I can't remember, but he was running in a majority black district in Georgia, and he's a conservative. He's a Republican, and they have nonpartisan races, but he did the same thing. He didn't lead with "I'm a Republican." And he was very adamant about
Right.
not doing that. And even though it was nonpartisan, people still know or can find out what party that you rock with, right? But
Exactly.
he
Yeah.
didn't
Right.
lead
Right.
with it.
Right.
Yeah, he did the same thing that you did. I mean, discussed the issues that people were worried about and applied conservative solutions to it. So and he ended up winning. It was a local office, but he ended up winning. And you're right. That is how you win hearts and minds. Don't lead with, oh, you got to vote for my party, or the party is really secondary to the individual candidate and the issues
Right.
that
Yeah.
they care most about. So I mean, I'm glad to hear that, and I think that we definitely need more of that, because I think people get too hung up on, well, libertarian ideology says this, libertarian or liberty or whatever. But to the app for people
Yeah.
like you and I, that resonates because we're already in this world. But what do
Right.
people on the ground want to hear about that don't really understand or don't really think about these concepts? No, what they're thinking about is, you know, I want to keep my job. I want these grocery prices to go down. I don't want to be
Yeah.
sending all this money to Ukraine, yada, yada, yada. They don't think about it through the terms of an ideological lens. This is the crap that I'm dealing with. What are you going to do about it?
Right. You're not going to win them over by like flipping over Rothbard on their front door and saying, here on page 142, paragraph 3, this is what should change your mind. It's not going to happen, right?
Mhm,
I mean, Jeff, you know very well. You and I we both live in the South now. You're originally from Southern California, but you live in Louisiana now.
mhm,
I was born and raised in Louisiana. And one thing about living sort of in what I consider to be the real world, which is, areas like this where people are working and providing and doing things is they're busy. They're incredibly busy with the matters of life. They're busy with their job. They're busy mowing their yard. They're busy raising their children. And they don't have time to jump into long philosophical discussions regarding, the nature of their rights or roles of government. They just want somebody, again, that has some practicality, common sense solutions. And if you can lead with that, you will be successful. And as you so highlighted, voting for party has gotten us into a lot of bad things, a lot of bad things. And I think that default to 126 of the alphabet is going to rule our electorate decisions. What a horrible way for a country to die. right? Well, someone says, "How did America fail?" Grandpa said, "Well, people decided their letter of the alphabet was better than somebody else's, and
Mm,
they kept showing up, and just whoever had that letter is who they were voting for." I mean, again, what a sad way to go, right? So if we're gonna go, let's not go that way.
yeah, exactly. I mean, there was a reason why I think it was George Washington who warned about political parties, although it's inevitable. I mean, in any type of government system, you're going to have political parties because people
Sure.
with like minds tend to gather together. But I think that the party has been elevated to a level that it should never have been. But I wanted to talk. I was looking at your press release on your Twitter page or X, whatever the hell you want to call it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you have three pillars, and I want to see you kind of unpack those. You've got taxation, education, and fostering constructive conversation, which I was really interested in, especially since you're running for office. That's not something that's brought up a lot. But can you kind of go over those three pillars of taxation, education, and fostering constructive conversation?
Yeah, let's go. Let's start again with taxes. Again, I fundamentally believe, and I think most people, if I ask them, should they own their labor and their property, they agree as well.
Mhm.
But we always get, but how do we fund the blank, right?
Yeah.
How do we pay for the roads? How do we pay for the schools, the libraries? I think that the problem we have in legislatures in America today, and in the political process today, is nobody wants to just admit that the current system is immoral.
Mm,
And that's crazy to me. Okay. I'm not saying that we have to admit to having all the answers. I'm not saying that we have to, admit that what's going on right now maybe not quote unquote necessary. But can we admit that it's at least immoral? Jeff, imagine this. Imagine you and I and some other people, we live at the South Pole in Antarctica, and we're in this house or building or whatever. And the only way we've been heating this house is by burning people alive, right? And if I said to you, Jeff, golly, burning people alive is pretty immoral, you go, I agree. It is. And we're trying to find a way to heat this building without burning people alive. Nobody would go, well, that's how we heat the building. People would, of course, assume and agree on the immorality of it,
mhm.
and that would at least have that common ground to begin from. We don't have that in government today, right? It's just crazy to me that there's not consensus on at least that matter. That the taxation of income is incredibly immoral, and in perpetuity property taxes maybe even more so than that. The fact that people cannot own their homes or own their vehicles, I think, is just completely contradictory to being a free person in a free society. And it's certainly not the role of government, I think, in a free society to be rent-a-center for the citizenry. The errands that's there anytime you don't make the payment to come pick up your patio furniture set. I think that that is just absolutely crazy.
Mhm.
And so what I want to be able to do is just have a voice in the legislature that anytime we're funding something or talk about something, hey, can we find a way to fund this in a less coercive manner? Is there a way? Can we at least talk in this committee process and this brainstorming process, and just changing that sort of thing, right? I can't promise anything. The governor has so said that she is working to phase out the state income tax. I will gladly join her in that effort. But I also think that we need to look at personal property taxes and in perpetuity property taxes. Now, that kind of goes hand in hand really with education. Jeff, as you know, education in this country today, especially in states like Arkansas and Louisiana, I think in metric cannot be viewed as successful. I don't think that we can view it as successful when nearly half the people graduating are not literate, are functionally illiterate at grade level, have no job skills. I saw a sobering statistic in my state that said of the graduating class this year, the people that will graduate are just graduated in May.
Mhm.
In the next 10 years, something like 60% of them will be on some form of federal assistance for
Mm,
some period of time. It could be as little as just food stamps. It could be, again, long-term welfare, something, whatever it's going to be. That's insane.
yeah.
That's insanity. It's also really, really cruel. Um, the progressive likes to come from a place of compassion. They like to say that we're being compassionate and we must be compassionate. But when you perpetuate decades of dependence, that's not compassion, that's slavery.
Mhm.
That is literally keeping a subclass of human beings down on purpose to perpetuate your own power and justify the necessity of you being there. And our educational system, I think, is where that begins. And currently, it's also the only place I think that we have room to change. The federal government is so involved in everything else on a state level in every state in America, especially in healthcare, for instance, that you can't really do major sweeping reforms of a healthcare industry.
Right.
Now, interestingly enough, the K through 12 system in America, as you know, a state is fully able to do whatever they want to with that. Here's the problem, Jeff. If you don't do it the way we say, you're not going to get these Title One funds, right?
Mhm.
And you need these Title One funds, Jeff, because hey, you got that school there that's just there. The people are poor. We got to pay for their lunches. They're just doing. So you got to do all these things. And I think that we have sold ourselves into this cycle of mediocrity that's spinning down into failure by again letting someone else cook our own cake with their recipe, and then wondering why we're failing, right? And so the educational conversation, I think, ties in directly to the taxation conversation and economic conversation, which is we need to grow an independent generation. Clearly, we need to
Yes.
have in 10 to 15 years a citizenry that one third of them is not on Medicaid. You know, that we don't have that statistic of 60% going on to be some sort of federal dependent. That Arkansas is not a vassal state, that Louisiana is not a vassal state. Job ready skills, people graduating, quote unquote, whether it's pseudo government education or some, private, public partnership, or ideally, I'd like the government completely out of education, but we're not going to
Yeah.
get there. And so I really like the idea of career and trade, trade education as some sort of K-12 substitute, identifying talents early, allowing parents to make those decisions. Because, what happens with an 18-year-old who graduates from wherever, who can earn $60 an hour as a pipe fitter, they don't go on to become a federal dependent. They don't also go on to probably get involved in criminality, and they probably start families, and they probably stay with them, and they raise their children, and they become contributing members of society. And I think that's just good for everybody, but it's not good for people who want to stay in power because they're needed, right?
Exactly.
It's not good for those people. They don't want that at all. That's not good for them. And so that sort of fits in with that. Now we have a question regarding revenue, and that's going to happen anytime you propose something in a legislative body. You're just one of currently in Arkansas, I'd be one of 135 voices, one of 100 state representatives, 35 senators. And the concept of, revenue neutrality will come up, right? Everything's going to have to be, at least be revenue neutral because they operate under this false assumption that the numbers they're given are the true numbers. And
Right.
that's the number you have to have, which already is I think a logical fallacy. But interestingly,
Oh,
in the
you
trade
froze
educate
up.
that make it
You
to where the
froze up for
private
a bit. Can you
enterprise
say
would
that
want to
again?
engage in that process, and also, yeah, I said in the career and trade education process, I think there's an opportunity for private institutions to engage in some profit making activity that could help ease the quote unquote burden of giving up Title One funds. We could say to heck with the federal government, and they go, well, how do we make up the money? And we go, well, interestingly enough, so and so institute and so and so institute and so and so place are willing to lease Department of Education property that we have that we're not using. Uh, and then they will be economically incentivized by job placements and commissions from them so they have an incentive to get these kids to be to be readily employed and earning good livings. They
Yep.
also are helping fund a quote unquote deficit that we might have in this issue. And oh, by the way, we're growing an independent generation to where our cost and need, so to speak, of being in this business to begin with is going to go less and less and less. And the reason I know that has to be true is because it's fought against so hard by the progressives,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
they fight desperately. They're holding on to desperately school choice. They are just like they will slander and knock it down as much as they can. They
Even though
will when they
everybody
start to
wants
lie.
school choice.
Right. Yes, they will pick the one thing, they'll misrepresent it, they'll say it in the wrong way. Oh, you're robbing from these kids to pay these kids. So I know that has to be key to their agenda is the education system. And so if you see how those two things work together, then you also see how we're talking about constructive conversation, where we're looking at things again from not this binary me versus you sort of scenario, but where there's really a common sense injected into it and maybe can bridge the gap. I'll end this long rant or discussion with one sort of point here. We had a gentleman in Little Rock, Arkansas. His name is Brian Malinowski. He was the executive director of the Clinton Airport.
Yes.
He was a gun hobbyist and was selling guns privately to individuals. And the ATF decided at some point in time he had crossed a threshold and he was no longer a private seller and he was now somebody who should have had an FFL. And again, no number. They just get to decide when this is. And they want to execute a search warrant, not an arrest warrant. And they knocked in his door at 6 a.m. and they killed the man because they, like me, like you, like anybody, he did, I should say, answered that with force. Because if your door's coming off the hinges, Jeff, at 6 a.m., I have a feeling you would probably shoot too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Of course, they had no body cameras, had none of this. This the sad part about it is it takes a rich white guy being killed for this to be an elevated discussion
Hmm?
in politics. That's just the truth. And I'm not here to defend that or not defend it or whatever. That's just the truth. But this is an issue that has affected the black community for decades.
Yep. Yep.
This should be something that we have a unanimous consent behind. We should be able to rally everybody behind getting some legislation that does whatever it's possible that we can do on a state or local level to prevent this. Again, we can't tell the federal government what to do, but we could at least not give them our resources, not
Yeah.
give them our buy-in. Maybe that keeps them from doing less. And so I was talking to one lawmaker who will remain nameless. And I said, where would this need to get through committee? What was the holdup? And he talked about some people at the state police and somebody at the, somewhere else. And he goes, and look, we really would need the legislative black caucus on this matter. And I said, well, yeah, shouldn't they just jump all over this? And he's like, well, they don't talk to us and we don't talk to them.
Mm.
And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I'd love to talk to him. He's like, but there's this whole shell game that happens. There's a wall here where it's not about the same enemy. It's about, we want to beat the enemy only if our stamp is on it, right? And I
Mm.
might know a guy, Jeff, that could bridge that gap.
Yeah.
I might know a guy that could walk over to the legislative black office and say, hey, look, here's the deal, man, and we might can work together. And that I think would be revolutionary, at least in our legislature. And if we could demonstrate that and the effectiveness of that sort of stuff, I think you start seeing libertarians occupying offices across this country at a state level, whether they run as Republicans or libertarians, or I've never seen one run as a Democrat, but maybe they would. Um, and again, because the principles of liberty is what's going to save us. I fully and fundamentally believe that.
Awesome. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting what you were saying about, this caucus doesn't talk to other caucuses or other parties. And it sounds like what goes on in Congress. I remember when Breonna Taylor happened, Rand Paul put forth the Breonna Taylor Justice and Policing Act to ban no-knock raids, and
Right.
Democrats wouldn't sign on to it because they wanted to be the one responsible for passing some type of legislation. They didn't really care about stopping
Right.
no-knock raids that put police and civilians in danger. They wanted to put their name on it. And I suspect that that's happening in the state house in Arkansas and in every single state. How do you break through
Yeah.
that? Like this, the need for my party. Because again, we talked about that at the beginning, the party being prevalent or prioritized over everything else. How do you push through that?
So, man, I think that if you look at the motives behind that issue, what is it that if I'm a Democrat who, for instance, is in the legislative black caucus,
Mhm.
why is it that I don't want to have something that doesn't have me originating it or it doesn't come from us? What is the reason that we want the win, but only if our stamp is on there? And I think, if I'm getting in the mind of these people, it's that this is how the mechanism at which I'm elected. This is the mechanism that funds my viability, that runs my donor base, that keeps this thing going. And I think that people get just caught up in the routine of that. And so, really, I think that showing viability of a third way is part of how that happens. In my personal belief, the Libertarian Party would not have a national organization. That's just my personal belief. I think that a people that are very decentralized should remain decentralized, and that libertarian affiliates would be places in states and local levels where they would build coalitions with other lawmakers. And hey, if your party's pushing you into a behavior that you don't want to be involved in, if you were being told, hey, you know what, if you just don't sign off on this bill, we're going to primary you out. Look, that bill's really good, but so and so originated. Jeff over there originated it, and we don't work with Jeff because Jeff is in the rural Louisiana caucus and we're in the rural Arkansas caucus. And we're only going to defeat the boogeyman as long as we originate the bill.
Right.
After all, we're the ones that got you elected, Michael, right? The rural Arkansas caucus. So you can't have him with his name on it. Um, I think that just showing viability of a third way begins to heal that process. But I'm a big believer in the broken red light theory of life, which is, things change when one person changes it. You pull up to a broken red light, everybody doesn't know what to do. They're all stopped. And then someone just says, you know what, screw it, and goes. And then everybody else starts going,
Yep.
right? I think that's how we change these things.
Yeah, becoming a tipping point. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
And so with the last pillar, the fostering constructive conversation, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, why did you include that as one of your key pillars? And what does that mean, fostering constructive conversation?
So, let's think first, what's destructive conversation, right? Let's define that
Twitter.
first, right?
Just log on to
Yeah.
Twitter for 5
You'll
seconds
see
and
it.
you'll see destructive
These
conversation.
yeah, that's right. Destructive conversation is meant to simply tear down an idea or an opponent or a principle or an establishment or anything else. And look, there are places and times for destructive conversation. You need to have destructive conversation in a nation of free people. Absolutely. For instance, abolish the ATF, in the Fed, talk about the horrors of them. These are destructive conversations, but coincidentally and interestingly, it also requires a level of constructive conversation on the back end. Well, how do we end the Fed? How do we build a coalition of people? What are the mechanisms that would best sort of move the political window to where that's a popular stance? How do we actually have that happen? Is it legislatively? Is it judicially? Is it a combination of the both? Do we do it on a state level, a local level? Do we have to have an Article 5 convention of the states? What is it that we need to do? Those are constructive conversations where we're working together for a common goal. Again, that symptom of this binary duopoly, the me versus you, us versus them, oppressor versus oppressee, and we will take whatever identity we want to at the time that best fits us,
Right.
right? Is the reason we can't have that. We have very good destructive conversation. We have great destructive conversation, like again, in those institutions, do this, do that. The problem is we can't build any coalitions. We can't get the constructive conversation to happen. And, it's interesting too to see just like you said, the conversations on Twitter, they really are sort of a microcosm for the real world. I say Twitter's not a real place, but some of those conversations are sort of distilled versions of real conversations. And here's a perfect example. In the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, our mayor is proposing a sales tax increase. He says we should vote for a sales tax increase, and it would really be good if we did so. Not to mind the fact that we're already very overtaxed, not to
Right.
mind the fact that he's proving to be a very poor steward of what he already has. And so my wife bent a wheel on a pothole here in the city, massive pothole. And it was like a $700. I had to buy a new wheel, and of course, my wife drives a 2012 paid for little Lexus car, but the wheel's like $800 to find somewhere. And we had to do all that, and I made a post about it, and I said, hey, Mayor Scott, why should we trust you with more money when you clearly cannot be, handle the money that we have now? You're not being
Right.
proving a good steward. And an individual sort of came at me and said, you know, well, we need this, we need that. And I kind of retorted back and said, look, I'm just saying that he's not proving to be a good steward. And he says, well, yeah, let's just end all taxes and let's just have gravel roads and and we'll go ahead and we'll go back to horse and buggies. And you see
Roads.
you see these conversations devolve this way every time. And we cannot get anything done in this country as long as that is the way that we talk. I mean, go back and look at, again, these are flawed people, all human beings are, but go look at the writings between two individuals who may have been political enemies in the 18th century. They are having constructive conversation, right? They're not like, oh, yeah, well, your mama did this. They're not doing those kinds of things. And again, I think that's a symptom of a predictable symptom and outcome of the sort of binary and adversarial thing that we currently have going on and echoed in either state houses, legislatures, all the way to a federal level. And also, what's interesting too about constructive conversation is when you are working together for a goal and setting aside differences. I think that's just beneficial, just in general for society, right? I mean, it's interesting. Like if you take like 10 guys and you throw them in a room and they all come from different backgrounds and they all have different belief systems and you put them together on a problem to solve, they'll all leave best friends. They'll all be getting along by the end of it.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, let's solve some problems, become friends along the way, realize we all got more in common than we have in difference. We all have some sort of value. We all have something to bring to the table. And again, just stop the division and really
Yeah.
start trying to get things done. Yeah,
And here I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat for a second, and I have a feeling you'll agree
sure.
with what I'm about to say. I mean, there's a reason why we have so much division in our society today, and then this is not the first time America has been divided. It's been divided at many points throughout
Sure.
our history, but the thing is that we think that Republicans and Democrats are our enemies, black and white are our enemies, straight LGBTQ are our enemies, when really the enemies are the elites and the government. And people say, oh, that's a populist. No, it's true. It's objectively
Yeah.
true. And if you look at
Yeah.
who's sowing the division, it's politicians, it's media figures, whether it's terrestrial media or digital media. You've got online influencers, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian too. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
even
Yep.
people in
Yeah.
within our orbit, yes. And it's just the more you watch it, the more you start thinking, I wonder if these people are specifically getting paid to divide. Yes, they are. Whether they know it or not, they are getting paid to divide because they're getting paid.
Yeah.
Well, if you go on X right now and you say the most incendiary thing about black people or about white people or about Republicans and Democrats, the algorithm will reward you. Maybe even the media outlet that you work for might reward you. And it's much easier to get by that way, by having these destructive conversations that never turn constructive. Because, like you said, destructive conversation is necessary, but destructive conversation by itself only destroys, it doesn't build anything. And I think that that's the
Right.
reason why the elites are pushing us to be more destructive in our speech, and especially on digital platforms. What do you think of that?
That's first off, that's a very astute observation. I mean, like you said, even just right there on that very basic and simple level, an algorithm promoting your social media based off having those sort of destructive kind of ideas is incentivization. It's monetary incentivization for some people with very large accounts. It can be a significant amount of money, right? Um, and I think that it's been noted before that after sort of Obama's first term in office, when there was sort of the promise of ending Guantanamo and ending the wars, and these things were going to happen, that the terms like systemic racism and all these things begin to trend higher and higher in the media, like it was a way to say, let's go ahead and focus over here, right? You don't need these people getting too close to the idea that we're never going to actually do these things. We need to make sure that they stay over here. And it's weird because, like, I mean, you're roughly my age, and I grew up in Louisiana, and my city is over half black, for instance. And every school I went to was over half black, and my friends are black, and the sports teams I played on, and whatever. And nobody ever, there was never like this idea, well, like, oh man, you're oppressing me. There was never, it
Right.
just didn't exist. And then now it's like I can't turn on anything or look anywhere without again someone saying this sort of model, right? And like now you're getting it with like the DEI conversation. Like not everything's you can blame on DEI. Stop.
Yes.
Like stop. Like like a plane has a wheel fall off and like a DEI hire, and I'm like, how do you even know who the guy was that put the like it's crazy. It's just crazy. And again, they're rewarded for defaulting this ground fault back to the basis and most simplest and divisive conversation. So yes, whether by design, things done, things left undone, a combination of all of them, which is probably the truth. Um, we are better divided for these elites to continue to do what they're doing. They love for me and you to argue about systemic racism. They love for me and you to argue about reparations. They love for me and you to argue about abortion. Again, not that that's not a very important topic. They
Sure.
love for me to argue about, about all these issues. Just don't start arguing about how we fund ourselves. Don't start looking into
Mm,
how we manipulate and control everything in the economy. Don't dare look into how we make sure that even though we all act like we're enemies of each other, somehow we all belong to the same clubs, organizations, and we don't have to have a grand conspiracy to benefit us because we swim in the same water with these people, right? So if you're a Democrat, chances are you go to the same country club as a Republican in your state, right? They know what's good for each other. They're involved in
yeah.
mutual aid for themselves. And that's what's interesting is you're already seeing it too with the populism idea. It's like, oh, populism is bad. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's just populism is again, just it comes out of when people feel like things aren't working for them.
Yeah.
When the rest of us are getting screwed out here, and somehow like, Nancy Pelosi's opening her $30,000 refrigerator. I got ice cream. And me and you were like, I just got fired from my job. The plant closed down. I
Right.
can't pay my bills. Again, how would we not be populist? And so they just don't, again, they don't want that. They don't like that. That's not good for them. And so the best thing that I think that people can do is realize it's, again, not red versus blue, it's the state versus you. And I love that adage because it's absolutely true.
It is absolutely true. And I have to give it to them because they are so good at what they do that they've literally got black and white people arguing over freaking women's basketball. Like they've made Caitlin Clark
Yeah.
into this mantra, a centerpiece of racial tensions. And I'm like, it's a sport. It's called
Yeah.
basketball. Yeah, they're giving her a
Right.
hard time. She's a rookie. She gets fouled. People get fouled in basketball. I used to play basketball when I was younger. It happens. And yet they have manipulated us so badly that we forget what it's like to play basketball. And we look at this and be like, oh, they're doing that to her because she's white. Oh, no, you're just criticizing Angel Reese because she's black. Just shut up. Do you realize how stupid you look? And then I go on Twitter and point it out and they get mad at me. I'm like, no, you guys are the ones messing up. While you're distracted by Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and all this BS, these elites over here are raising your taxes. They're funding more wars. They're driving inflation. They're doing all kinds of stuff to make themselves more powerful at your expense because they know you're not watching. And it is so frustrating to me. I think some people get it, and maybe some people are starting to, but it ain't enough. It's just not enough.
It reminds me of like if like you were messing with like a dog or something and like you had it blindfolded and it was just tired of it and it wanted to bite you back, but instead you like held over like a chew toy to it.
Mhm.
Like it's this idea that it's getting it out of its system to rage against something, but it's raging against
Mhm.
something that's harmless to the person that's actually provoking it. And that is exactly what's happening because we do have something that is oppressing all of us. We do have a common enemy.
Yes.
We are under the thumb of a very oppressive system that does horrible, horrific things to us every day. Black, white, old, young, middle class, lower class, upper class doesn't matter. Every day throughout this country, those things are happening. And so, yeah, it's a lot more convenient to say, Jeff, don't be looking toward, the central bank or anything for the reason. The reason why you're having a bad day, Jeff, is because so and so is mean to so and so in the WNBA, and it's
Mhm.
proof positive that you have to lash out against those people and against stay divided. I mean, that's a great observation, and it's true, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So, as far as policy goes, I mean, we talked about taxation, lowering taxes or eliminating as many as possible, finding different ways to fund things. That's going to resonate definitely with somebody who's more of a conservative or moderate Republican. That's going to
Right.
resonate. The school choice issue resonates with everybody because everybody wants it. But when it comes, because I mean, where your district seems to be about 50-50, you've got Democrats that you have to win over. One of the
Right.
issues that Democrats are concerned about is criminal justice. I mean, how do you plan on leveraging criminal justice and maybe other issues that, left-leaning voters care about to win them over? Because the thing about libertarians is that we actually have the best of both worlds. We believe
Yes,
the
we
right
do.
things on the right and on the left. It's just that the parties that represent right and left don't actually do what they say they're going to do. So how
Right.
do you plan
And
on?
we tend to, I think, we seem to be better at advertising the sort of quote unquote right leaning policies.
Mhm.
And I don't know why that is. It's sort
Yeah.
of, part of the kind of the Ron Paul-esque thing is that sort of issue. And so this is what I've found that's resonated with Democrat voters in my district that I've talked to. So I can speak to this from an experiential point of view, an empirical point of view, and not just what I think works. Okay. When I talk to most people and ask them why they're a Democrat or why they became a Democrat or have voted Democrat in their life, they do so from an emotional place. They're like, well, I want to take care of the little guy. I want poor people to do better. I want to make sure that if somebody gets sick, that they don't end up, homeless. And they talk about these caring, compassionate things. That's what this is really about. And so you're right. The concept of criminal justice reform, the idea that it's not justice if you're locking up people who don't have victims, right? Free Dexter Taylor, by the way, right?
Yes.
That's an injustice and that's harm, right? If you're talking about again, the fact that government should be transparent and answerable to the people, and if they keep things secret, that's harm, right? If they're misusing your money, if they are backroom deals and nefarious things going on, that's an issue. And so, yes, when we talk about like criminal justice reform, we talk about government transparency, and when you highlight the concept of, look, I am compassionate too, but it's not compassion if we continue it this way. I too want criminal justice reform, but here's the deal: I really mean it. I really mean it. And to me, criminal justice reform starts with the idea that crimes without victims should not be crimes. That's number one. I think that starts there. We also talk about the idea, especially here in the South in the Bible Belt. I know you've heard this, that America is a Christian country. And people will say things like, Arkansas should be a Christian state. And one of the things about Christianity is forgiveness.
Yes.
The idea that we forgive people. Don't forget, but we forgive people. When a gentleman leaves prison or a woman leaves prison and she wants to reintegrate or he integrate into society, what they want to do is they want to avoid criminal activity. They want to get a well paying job and they want to stay in that, right? We make it very hard for people to do that.
Yes.
In fact, we make it easier for them to return to the same life that they returned to. We make it easier for them to return to a life of criminality. And of course, we've incentivized people to profit off of increased current crime instead of decreased future crime. And when you have those conversations, especially again, criminal justice reform being really one of the main ones, Democrats really, really like that. Also, a thing too that you'll find, like in a red state like mine, is that there's sort of this just generational ennui with Democrats, where they're just like they're just frustrated with the way it is, and they can't really put their finger on why they're frustrated with the way it is. They just want something to change. And I often just simply ask them to consider who represents the best and most compelling opportunity for true change. Is it someone like myself who's actually different, or is it just to reelect a member of the same minor party that has been involved in everything for the past 150 years? And that tends to sort of win some hearts and minds too. Of course, you're going to have your diehard party people who are not going to, change party lines. But I've said it when I started this race, and I continue to say it, is that um, a Republican can't flip this district. It just can't happen, and couldn't flip it and won't flip it.
Mhm.
It will take somebody like myself because, there's a lot of people that just won't jump over to that other letter. That other letter's bad. That other letter's bad. They just can't deal with it. But yeah, criminal justice reform is, I mean, think about it. If everything in our life is about justice, right? And that's what the proper role of government is to be, is one, protect our rights, which is a justice concept, and to be the ultimate arbiter, which is a justice concept, then really everything sort of goes down and evolves into criminal justice reform in some shape or manner. Yeah, and it's a really common thread that I think gets overlooked a lot in discussions regarding liberty and liberty principles.
Yeah, yeah, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, and it is an issue. I mean, for some reason, libertarians, or at least the way the liberty movement has approached issues, is by highlighting the more right leaning aspects of what we believe, but not so much what would be considered left leaning. So I'm
Right,
glad that you're articulating that, because I think it's very important. And the other issue too is that regardless of which party or policies that are most important to people, you have to think, okay, you've been voting for this party forever. Have they actually done it? No, no, they haven't.
right.
I mean, it's just funny, when I was
Yeah,
more in the conservative movement trying to reform that, I would always say about Democrats who run black areas, and yet black people still vote Democrat. Because at a certain point, if it's been 60, 70 years that you have governed a city or a town or whatever, and you're getting the same results, but you're still pushing the same policies, at a certain point, you're doing it on purpose. Like, you're not actually trying to
right,
make a difference. And I can even say the same thing on the Republican end. Like, the big conversation was, how can the Republican Party attract more black voters? Well, it's clear that they don't want it. They're doing the same thing that they've done since the 60s, ignoring black voters and then wondering why they don't get black voters. No, you're not wondering why. You are actively not trying to get them. And that's just one
that's
example.
right.
I mean, there's a lot of different examples of how these parties have done the same thing, push these same policies, only to do something different when they get into office. Yeah, at a certain point, the apparatus, maybe not all of the individuals, because I'm sure there are a lot of individuals in both parties who get elected and they actually want to make a difference, but they can't, because the apparatus does not want that change. And that's where I think somebody like you can come in and say, you know what has this gotten you so far? Nothing. It's almost like
Right,
what Trump said, what the hell do you have to lose? I wouldn't necessarily put it that
yeah,
way, but it's that same
right.
concept. Like, that when you vote for this person, things are going to stay the same. Nothing has ever changed. It's just gotten worse. So this kind of brings me to my last question. In your press
Sure.
release, you mentioned the importance of creating a more inclusive and effective government, which ties exactly into what we're talking about. But when you say inclusive and effective, what are you referring to when you say that, and what steps would you want to take to make sure that voices are being heard and actually being represented in the legislative
Right.
process?
And so again, effective at what and inclusive of what?
Mhm.
That sort of statement begs that sort of question, right? What are you referring to? Do I want government more effective at levying taxes? No, I don't. Do you want government more effective at violating the rights of individuals? No, I do not.
You're already
Do
very
you
good at
want
that.
government to, yeah. Do you want government to include people who are, I don't know. Do you want them to also represent the Chinese and represent this? Not necessarily, obviously, right? When we're talking about inclusive and effective when it comes to government, is everyone is an individual and effective at protecting those rights. We have to have people realize that government is not the answer to everything. That government is not the provider of everything. Again, I had a conversation with a Democrat who's running today on that beast of Twitter regarding this, and it's clear and present that his belief is that we come from the government and that we should be thankful that we get everything out of the government. The government has everything and we get it from them. Not the idea that the
Praise
government
be
has
to the
nothing and they
states.
took everything. I mean, I'm telling you, it was absolutely the craziest thing I've read. And this man's running for public office, and he's actually seems usually fairly intelligent. So inclusive and effective means including everyone as an individual, not group identity, not group politics. In fact, I reject the concept of group rights. I think that we all just have individual rights. I think that we do a real disservice to this country and to everyone when we start doing group rights. We all have the same rights and we should. And the ultimate one is our liberty, whether no matter what you are or what you believe. And then effective is effective at doing that, protecting those. Is it an effective use of government to, Jeff, you're driving here to my city and you're coming here to buy a trailer or something, and you got, $6,000 in your wallet because you're going to meet a guy in El Dorado, Arkansas, and you're going to buy a trailer from a guy, and you get pulled over for doing 5 miles over. And you know what, Jeff? We don't get a lot of black folks on this road. You must be up to something crazy, right? Mind if we search your car? No, I don't spend sense of search as well. The dog smelled something anyway, so now we're looking. And oh, here you got $5,000 of cash. What's that for? Well, I'm going to buy a trailer. Yeah, yeah, right. Right. Here, we're going to give you this slip of paper. We're taking this. Good luck getting it back. Right. That's not effective government. Right. That's not effective government. It's not effective government to say, hey, you know what? We're going to spend your tax money and we're going to give it to very, very large corporations who don't have your best interest in mind, who you become a profit motive and center for. We'll even make sure that we have protectionist laws and regulations around you getting recompense if they damage you. That's not an effective use of government. It's not an effective use of government to say, look, we know better how to educate your child. No, 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 mind the fact that he has a pretty good chance of graduating and not being able to read at grade level, and no mind the fact that he won't be able to think critically or constructively about anything or have any real job skills. You must send him here, and if you don't send him here, we'll put you in jail. And I'm sorry you don't have any other options for that because you're just a working class individual. But that's what we've decided. That's not effective use of government. So inclusive of the individual and effective at its very only base role, protecting the rights you're born with. That's what that statement means.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining. I'm really going to be following your campaign because I'm very interested in seeing how it turns out, especially when you win. But we got to definitely get you back on. But before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can
Sure.
find you, how they can support you, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Michael White. I'm running for state representative in Arkansas in District 75. And if you're asking yourself, why do I care about an election in Arkansas? Well, this is the most winnable race for liberty in the entire country. And I do mean that. This is a 50-50 district, no Republican candidate. It's incredibly winnable. We can prove the viability and the practicality of liberty. So I need your support. And because we don't have these large donor bases in our state or this large coalition of libertarians behind me locally to help me, it's going to require nationwide support. So if you're listening to this, please visit my website, mw, the number 4liberty.com. The best way that you can help me is obviously make a financial contribution to my campaign. I'm going to do my part. I will knock on doors. I'll conduct myself with integrity, and we're advertising a winning message. But if you can't make a donation, please share our content. Follow me on social media. All my links are there. That costs you absolutely nothing, and that in itself helps. Tell a friend about this. Share this podcast. Make sure that make sure you follow Jeff and retweet all his stuff because it's actually usually really good. And I think that's how you can support me. So again, MW, the number 4liberty.com, or you can just Google Michael White, Libertarian Arkansas, and you'll find all sorts of stuff. And so again, Jeff, this has been great to be with you. I have admired your work from a distance. I think years ago, was introduced to your lady friend.
Yes.
And that's how I found out about, and as you all kind of joined in a relationship, I started seeing your work and I was like, okay, this guy really gets it. And so it really is an honor and a privilege to be here and sit down and talk to you because you could be talking to people way cooler and more important than me today. And so I really appreciate this opportunity, man. Thank you very, very much.
No problem. I love that you came on. A great conversation, and we definitely got to do it again soon.
Absolutely. And we will.